Yay! Okay, great. Lovely, lovely to see you all. So, to start with this one was one that, like, this lecture was particularly hard for me to do. Not because there isn't a lot of material, and not because I don't know a lot about this, but precisely because there is a lot of material and I know a lot about this. And I think, honest to God, the hardest thing to do is to teach something that you know a lot about, because you want to, like, go 4 layers down on something when that's utterly unfucking helpful. So what I've tried to do is to give you an overview of some central questions, or some versions of central questions, in the debate about truth and fiction. There's a lot of different things that we've left out, some of which, might be important and I just haven't clocked it. So please, 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 please ask questions along the way. If there's stuff that just seems like there's an implicit kind of assumption, there probably is, just call me on it and we'll talk about it. So here's the plan. I want to start by doing some very basic kind of gestures at the concept of truth and fiction, and raise some complications that are going to come back several times. Then I want to talk about the 2 big games, actually that was a bad choice, the 2 big options there are for understanding truth and fiction claims. It's worth noting that these 2, so this fictional worlds approach and the game of make-believe approach, are both attempts to provide something like a semantics for claims, fictional truth claims. So what exactly those are, we'll talk about in just a second. But these are very broadly kind of, again, semantic approaches. Once we talk through those 2, I want to kind of gesture at some remaining kind of fictional weirdnesses, which relate back to both of these accounts, but also just kind of arise regardless of what your story about truth and fiction is. And then, since this is the last lecture, I thought we would just talk a little bit about it. Yeah?
How much relevance does this have with metaphors and semantic metaphors?
It's kind of close. So as we kind of talked about not in the metaphor section, but actually the week after, fiction is kind of in this weird halfway house between, we'll call it metaphorical content, and kind of getting something wrong. And one of the ways we can start to understand that, we'll talk briefly about it right at the beginning, but it's going to come up very, very quickly when we do the fictional world stuff too. So that's the plan. Let's talk about the kind of basics and complications. And actually, the joke here is really helpful because it gestures at one of the things we need to do right off the bat, which is distinguish between what we might think of as the vehicle and the fiction. So the vehicle is going to be something like the text, maybe the printed book, or, almost nobody reads printed books anymore, so, the file that you're looking at, right? That's the vehicle. The fiction is something else. Right? It's kind of what's being conveyed to you. So that's the thing we've got to do first, right? Distinguish between what you might call the fiction, right? These things, but that's not what we're talking about with truth and fiction. We're talking about what these things convey. So a way to sort of get at the idea is that these 2 different texts are different texts conveying the same fiction. Right? One's just a Dutch translation of the problematic Harry Potter. Right? Problematic not because of the story itself, but because of Rowling being a douchebag. But if you get the idea, you've already started to get the feel, right? We're not really interested in the text per se. We're more interested in whatever the text conveys. In the same way, to go back, right? The joke is being conveyed through this text, but the joke isn't the text, despite the fact that this actually hinges on making a kind of metatextual appeal. Okay, so that's the first thing. We're talking about fictions, not about the vehicles, not about the text, not about the book. And what we're talking about is, again, this very broad idea of truth in fiction. So we can get a run at this by thinking about a sentence like this. Holmes is a detective. There's a sense in which this is kind of true, and there's a sense in which this is kind of false. And we can get the feel for the broad truthiness by the fact that if you said this, most people are going to be kind of inclined to be like, yeah, okay. And similarly, you can get it by comparing it to something like Holmes is a dentist. It's very clear that this is wrong. Holmes is not a dentist. Holmes is a detective. So it's true, but there's also good reasons to say it's false. Right? If you round up all the detectives in the world, Holmes ain't going to be amongst them. And perhaps even more directly, people are quite happy to say Holmes doesn't exist because he's a fictional character. Right? Yeah.
Could you state property that could exist in the real world? So like Holmes, a property of Holmes is existing within detectives in the real world.
Yeah, something like that, right? He fails to have that, effectively.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't have the property of being a detective. Why? Because we round up all the detectives and he ain't there.
Okay.
Interestingly, it's also not true that he has the property of being a non-detective. Because if you round up all the things that are non-detectives, he won't be there either. Because he isn't. So if he isn't, there isn't a way that he is a detective or a non-detective. He's just not in the running at all. Goes the usual thought, right? So again, this kind of comes out true and it kind of comes out false. So the big challenge is to make sense of this kind of true, kind of false feeling. Now we could just go, it's always false and everything that people think are being claimed in fiction is just false. That's an option. It's not a very satisfying view. You could also say they're just true. But again, then you run into a problem of like, cool, why is he not amongst the detectives? There's another flat-footed solution, which is that Holmes, like all fictional characters, is a non-existent object. So this is a Meinongian view. Called Meinongian because Alexis Meinong, who kind of invented this broad approach, thought that intentional objects, so objects of intents, mental directed thoughts, aren't existing objects, they're non-existent objects. It's a view. So the thought would be that Holmes as the detective is true if and only if Holmes is in fact a detective. But importantly, he's just a non-existing detective. There's two kinds. There's the existing-y ones and the non-existing-y ones. So this would give you a way to make sense of, one, why it's kind of true and kind of false. Okay, to go back, we're talking about like the idea that this is sort of true but sort of false. So it's sort of true because, well, as long as you read it with the implicit non-existent, it's true. And it's sort of false because most people don't read it as non-existent. Yeah.
This seems a bit an easy way out or something. What do you mean with non-existent?
That's the challenge for this year. It's a very weird metaphysics.
Yeah.
So you've got to have a whole slew of existent objects, us, tables, chairs, everything that exists, and then an even bigger range of non-existent objects. And how in the hell non-existent objects can have properties or be things like detectives? Cool. It's a challenge for the Meinongian view. It's generally a reason why lots of people are put off by it. And there's a huge project about making this work and things like this. But more importantly, even if it works for things like Holmes as a detective, there's going to be lots of fictional truths that this story isn't going to cover. Yeah.
Yeah, I see.
It's okay.
The word
Meinongian.
Meinongian. What is that? I never heard of that.
Good.
I read it, but
Sorry, I went really quick. So a Meinongian is someone who accepts Alexis Meinong's view that intentional objects, so objects of intentional thoughts, so object-directed thoughts, are either at existing objects, I believe that you, or non-existent objects. I worship Zeus. I can worship Zeus even if he's non-existent. But Zeus will then be, in some sense of be, but he will not exist. So it's a very broad position, again, about this idea that there are non-existent objects. There are non-existent objects, however we read the R, and they can be then put to use in lots of places. One application is for fictional truth. Don't stress, it's not going to come up again. The big thing for us is that even if this works for some fictional truths, it doesn't work for all. Right? 221B Baker Street houses a detective. That can't be treated with this Meinongian solution because this is a real address, and it doesn't, in fact, house a detective.
It's a bank, right?
It's actually a museum now, but right. But importantly, right, it's the kind of thing that again has that sort of true and false feeling. It's exactly the sort of thing we think should be true in the relevant Holmes fictions. It can't be done in this kind of Meinongian way. So, okay. This helps in some, but not all cases. So here's a better idea. And this is the kind of core of Lewis's paper. Right? It's that what we're going to do is that we read claims like Holmes is a detective, or, to go back, 221B Baker Street houses a detective, as carrying an implicit modifier. There's an according to operator that's being read into these claims. So Holmes as a detective actually, when you unpack it completely, says in the Holmes stories, Holmes is a detective. Or according to the Holmes stories, 221B Baker Street houses a detective and his friend. So you get this kind of treatment. You have this according to operator, which got a place for the name of a fiction, some way to designate a relevant fiction, and then you plug sentences in here. And these can be as simple or as complex as you need. So this gives us a then way to read into what was just looks like a simple surface level English sentence actually has a whole bunch of logical complexity in it. And this is the kind of thing you get all the time, right? Where you read this, so not this kind of sentence, but take contextually dependent sentences. It has an implicit like in context C. It's the same kind of thing, but just here, instead of a contextual modifier, we've got an according to modifier. The nice thing is if you read it this way, the actual sentence could be true or false, might be actually true, might be actually false, but that doesn't impact the reading. In the same way that, right, according to the Pope, P, that could be true or false, whether P is the case or not, right? Because it's an according to. So this is what the Pope says. Do we think the Pope always speaks truth? Well, according to the Catholic Church, yes, but we move that aside.
But these are two completely different things, right? The first is talking about some, well, in a fictional world described by the Holmes stories.
Good.
The other one is someone is making a statement.
So here's the trick, right? We can read these both in the same kind of way, right? They're both going to have these according to operators. The next question is going to be, how do we understand these according to operators? Mm-hmm. When is it true according to the Holmes stories that blah, 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 blah? This is where the world stuff's going to come in. Right? And it's the same kind of thing. In fact, the structure that Lewis gives for this, you can also give for testimony.
Okay, yeah.
Whether it's factual or non-factual.
You cannot say, I think, according to Arthur Conan Doyle, Holmes is a detective, because he won't agree with the fact that Holmes is
that's a different kind of thing, right? This is why, right, according to the Pope, we pick out what he said, and according to the Holmes stories, we're taking the stories as a kind of testimony. But importantly, the person who will be telling the story won't necessarily be the author. They might be, but those will be pretty rare cases. I'll come to that in just a second. So, This kind of reading explains why it's kind of true and kind of false. If you read it without the kind of operator, it's false. If you read it with the operator, it's true. And a lot of times we switch back and forth. And Lewis is quite happy to allow for a number of these claims to kind of shift as to which way you read them, depending on conversational context. If we're in the metaphysics room and being very serious and someone says Holmes is a detective, you read it as false. If we're talking about the fiction already, you probably should read it as true because you're reading it effectively as having the operator implicitly there. It's worth noting, this way is going to help us with lots of fictional truth claims, but not all. Right? Hashtag not all fictions, right? So you can deal with directly fictional sentences. You can't deal with what we kind of call metatextual or cross-textual claims. So metatextual ones are where we're explicitly talking about the characters as characters or as kind of textual products. So Holmes is a fictional character created by Doyle. That's not true in the stories. That's just true. Setting aside worries about that being an empty name. Similarly, if we say Holmes is a better detective than Philip Marlowe, people know who Marlowe is?
From CIS or something?
No, it's from
CSI.
Chandler. So kind of 50s and 60s, Private Eye.
Sin City or something?
No, earlier than that.
Earlier than that.
So if we know The Big Sleep, he was played by Bogart. He was played by Bogart in some of the early movies. Again, if you've seen the movie The Big Sleep, he's the main character from The Big Sleep. But note, right, this isn't true according to the Holmes stories. And this isn't true according to The Big Sleep either. Right? This is something that's kind of, it's hard to make sense of how it could be true or false. Feels like it's true. But importantly, this kind of treatment's not going to help. But that's okay, because these aren't strictly speaking claims in fictions. These are almost always claims about or of fictions. And we're interested in truth in fiction. So that's all right. It's not part of the scandal in Bohemia, one of the Holmes stories, that it was published in 1891. That's true of the story. That's not true in the story. So we're interested in the in claims. And of course, sometimes with weird texts, you will have this be the case. So one of my favorite stories, At Swim Two Birds, involves fictional characters conspiring to try and murder their tyrannical author. And in that case, the metatextual stuff is part of the fiction as well. They all realize that they're characters, and that's true in the fiction as well as true outside of the fiction. So we're only interested in that top kind, and that top kind looks like the sort of thing we can capture using this operator treatment. There are some more worries, and these are the kind of complications that are lurking. We're going to come back to them every once in a while, but broadly put them aside. Right? If we take Holmes as a detective, it's very hard to understand what this even says, even with the according to the fiction operator, because Holmes is an empty name. It doesn't pick anybody out. So who is it predicating being a detective to? We can make this worse, right? Take Chewbacca is a Wookiee. This is true according to, A New Hope, right? The first released Star Wars film, Episode 4. Not only is Chewbacca an empty name, but this is an empty predicate, right? We've got a visual of what Wookiees kind of look like, but we don't really know what the property of being a Wookiee is. So it's very hard to understand what is true according to the film.
But it's, in a sense, it's not an empty name. I think we had the discussion before, but
that's the thing, right? There might be ways to kind of cash this out. But note that according to the fiction, Holmes as a detective is actually true. So we then need to understand what the proposition, according to the fiction, is being kind of asserted or supported. And here, Holmes is an empty name, so it's very hard to know what that proposition is true according to the fiction. And that this one's even worse, because not only do we not have a predicate that we can give, we also don't have the empty name. We don't know what is this actually saying for us to do. Again, these are worries. It's not the end of the world. It's just a kind of complication that a full story has to address.
Because Wookiees can exist without there being a single Wookiee, right? So you could just define as
So,
being a Wookiee.
in a way, right? But then we might have to start appealing. So we could start to characterize it by like things we already have a grip on: fuzzy, tall, roars, whatever. But presumably there's more to being a Wookiee than just those things. And that's where we're just going to kind of run into like, okay, at some point you just got to get on board with the fiction stuff. Right? Yeah.
Tommy was first.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's okay. How does this relate to incomplete skeletons of dinosaurs or something that you try to reconstruct?
Difficult problem here, right, is this isn't necessarily an epistemic issue, right? It's not just that we don't know how to fill it out. It's that there is no filling it out. You might think, right? This is kind of what we were after with the Wookiees, right? It isn't just like, oh, I need to know more to know what a Wookiee is. At a certain point, it's going to appeal to like metachlorians, say. And we're like, what the fuck is that? And it's always going to keep going and end up gappy, no matter how hard you work, until you already just accept that we're dealing with something like the world of fiction. But we need to know what the contents of the world are. Which world are we picking out? So it isn't necessarily epistemic. It's easy to kind of motivate it that way, but it might be genuinely semantic. Right? What proposition is it telling us is true according to the story? Yeah.
That answer.
Same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But the epistemic approach could well be a path towards understanding what it means, right? Because if you say Holmes is a detective, how do you know?
We're told.
But, yeah, okay, but but other claims about Holmes, you can say, okay, how do we verify whether that's true or not? And then you go into the stories, and there you have it. With some things you simply can't know it because it's not in the story, and other things you can.
We'll come back to this.
Okay.
So there's a kind of circularity that might be lurking here. Good. Okay. So again, all of this is just kind of setting us up for this broad idea. We can read these kind of fictional claims, the ones that are explicitly meant to be the content, having this kind of structure, right, according to the story or in the Holmes story, blah, blah, blah. And the challenge then becomes, let's provide a semantics for these kinds of claims. Just another way to say, provide me a semantics for these straightforwardly fictional claims. And the two accounts we're going to look at do that. So our first account is the one that Lewis kind of champions and has been developed by several different groups. We'll come at it just thinking about Lewis's case because it's a nice, robust version. So here's a very naive response, right? What's going on when we say according to is that it's going to be stuff that's actually just true simplicator, in the world of the fiction. So this is kind of what we're saying, right? So Thomas Pavel, a character, he's got a book literally called Fictional Worlds that's structured around this. He's an erythologist. Pavel roughly says, look, when an author creates a fiction, they project or indicate a fictional world that we explore when we engage with the work. So to be fictionally true is to be simply true in the relevant fictional world. So this, again, to go back, in the Holmes stories, Holmes is a detective. That's basically going to be true if and only if, in the world, the fictional world of the Holmes story, Holmes is a detective. Problem with this account is it needs more detail. And you can kind of draw it out by thinking about two questions. So first, when we say fictional world, what are they? What does it mean to talk about fictional worlds? Especially ones where things can be true simplicator at. And secondly, when we talk about the fiction proposes or indicates a fictional world, how does it do that? What's the process here of going from fiction to fictional world? And it's worth flagging up this, right? We can't use the content to help specify the world, because what appealing to the world is supposed to do is tell us the content. So this is kind of close to that circularity concern we had a second ago. Because if we've already got the content, we don't need the world. So Lewis offers a kind of expansion of this thought. Lewis uses the same tool he uses in every damn situation, which are possible worlds. So possible worlds, I think we talked about this 2 years ago. I don't remember anymore. Possible worlds are effectively representations of possible situations. For Lewis, they're giant concrete entities, but we don't have to have them be that for this, right? What matters is that worlds represent possibilities. So there's already a sense in which things can be true or false relative for them. It's just, are relevant atoms true or false in the possible situation? Two things to note about possible worlds. They're complete. So that is, with every proposition, it's either true or false at a given world. And they're consistent. So that is, for every proposition, it's not the case that it's both true and false at a given possible world. So this means for each world, there's no gap, and there are no gluts. Right? There's never a truth value gap at a given world, and there are never truth value gluts at a given world. Now, the completeness already raises one major issue. You cannot identify fictional worlds with possible worlds. You can't have a one-to-one mapping.
Yeah, couldn't we say that Holmes just doesn't have a great-great-grandfather?
Cool.
That's just not a property he possesses.
So importantly, right, then what we have to do is kind of say that it's not just that he doesn't, it's that he has the property of, I don't know, lacking this and this and this and this. Cool. So we can kind of complete this. What we're probably going to very quickly get, though, is inconsistency. Holmes is a human being. All human beings have grandparents. Holmes lacks grandparents. You see the thought, right? We can fix that by saying, like, oh, now we're going to deny that all humans have parents or grandparents and things like this.
In the fictional world, it could, right?
We can. So the worry is that as we start to kind of accommodate these expansions, we're going to run into new contradictions. Ones that aren't going to be that explicit, but again, you might think like, all humans come from gametes, and okay, he doesn't either. Okay, shit, now we've got to redo all of biology. These kinds of things, right? That's the worry.
Are you then looking for like one definite description of what the fiction is, or what is the...
Cool. So the project, again, what we're doing is we're trying to think about how to make, according to fiction F, P true for any kind of P that we think is going to be part of F's content. Thought is, all right, P is going to be true if and only if, or true according to F, if and only if it's part of the fictional world of F. Problem, what's a fictional world? Well, it can't be a single possible world because fictions are broadly incomplete. Not every fiction. There might be some fictions that are complete, but many fictions are incomplete. Yeah.
And why can't we say that we don't know, but that it is indeed either she was, she's just, or she was?
We can absolutely go with this kind of epistemic thing. Right? One issue is that if we appeal to the epistemic problem, so there is a solution, we just don't know what, is we're still going to end up in the problem of trying to figure out what the answer is. Maybe there just simply is no way for us to get the answer. But if there's no way for us to get the answer, why presuppose that there was an answer to begin with? It's a kind of double-edged sword there, right? We'll come back to this actually when we talk about seriality. So pin it. It's going to come back. So again, the broad thought here, the worry, fictions are largely incomplete. Almost all. That is, there's going to be things that are neither true nor false according to the story. So, as an example, right, Holmes's great-great-grandmother was a seamstress. The stories don't say anything about it, so it doesn't really feel like it's true or false. Here's another one, right? Holmes hasn't
But as long
even...
as you're in the story, then that notion is either true or false, right? It has a definite answer, whether it exists. But if you're outside the story, you just don't know.
Well, so that's the trick, right?
Yeah.
You're pushing it in as this was the epistemic idea, right? Why think that there's a fact of the matter?
Why think that?
Yeah.
Because, well, the world of Holmes is quite close to our world. So in our world, it should be that
He is a human, they have great-grandmothers.
Yeah, that's the trick,
and
right?
the gametes, etc. Those are all
Good.
facts in that world.
So does he have a mole on his left shoulder? Does he have an even or odd number of hairs?
Indeed, so that's either true or false, but we don't know.
We can-
Outside of the story, we don't know.
We can collapse these down, right? And just say it's something we don't know about.
Yeah.
But importantly, it's not just that we don't know. There's never going to be an answer. There's no way to know.
Indeed.
If you're happy with that, then we can stop there. But note that that's going to leave you with some very strange things in fiction. It's going to potentially turn out that according to the Holmes stories, right, we make it to Mars in 2060. Because that's just something that will be true, say. And is it true in the story? Yeah.
No.
You see the kind of jokey problem, but gesturing at the problem. If we push it just to an epistemic thing, there will then be things that are true in the fiction, but we have no way of ever knowing. And not just we, but the author too. Right? So it's a kind of repugnant result. It's defensible, right? I mean, it's a position.
It seems fine.
Yeah, it's a position.
Yeah.
But again,
the author can change it, right? You can write another book in the Holmes series.
but why think that this canonical sequel changes what was true? Why not just dismissal of that as kind of unreliable narration? We couldn't know. You see
I'm more worried about consistency.
Everything's
because
good and
that's
not
clearly
everything's
something that's not the case in all fictional
Yes.
worlds, right?
That's
All
gonna be the
mistakes
big-
and,
So both of these are going to be problems.
completeness is by definition not there because there are a gazillion facts that are mentioned in the story.
Yeah.
And consistency is not guaranteed as well.
Yeah. But there's a quick fix for this. There's a much harder fix for this one. So the quick fix for completeness is don't think about single worlds. Take sets, collections. So what we can very quickly get is this account, right? In fiction F, P is true if and only if it's true at every world in a set determined by the fiction. So what this means is that inside the set, you can have a whole slew of variations. So some of the worlds will be seamstress, great-great-grandmother worlds. Some of them will be coal miner, great-great-grandmother worlds. Again, these kinds of things. So it allows and makes room for incompleteness without forcing you into this strange epistemic kind of thing. Yeah.
So this is like on the meta level, what the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did.
In a way, right? We're going to come to seriality. This is one of the fun issues.
So you take all sets that are consistent with the story, right?
Yeah.
All sets are possible, and still I think that's problematic, because if you have a possible world in which Holmes has a neighbor with 3 legs and blue hair, it could be true, but it doesn't make sense.
Good.
In the spirit of the story, it doesn't make sense.
But note that world, that kind of possibility, is irrelevant. It might be included in the set, but what we're going to say is it's only true in the fiction if it's true in every world in the set. So effectively,
every world. Okay.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Every world.
Yeah.
So what it's doing is cool. There's worlds where she's a seamstress.
Yeah.
The great grandmother's a seamstress.
Yeah.
There's worlds where she's a miner.
Yeah.
There's worlds where she lives next to a three-legged purple alien.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. None of that's going to be true in the fiction
Yeah.
because it's only what effectively is kind of restricted necessities are true in the
But
fiction.
if it's not true in the fiction, that doesn't imply that it's false in the fiction, right?
That's
This
gonna come
doesn't
back
allow
to-
for sequels, right?
Hmm?
Because now we have this world, and now Arthur Conan Doyle is going to write an extra sequel, and then it contains all these kind of facts that are absolutely not true.
So the seriality stuff is going to come back depending on how we want to think of seriality. But this can be compatible with seriality too. Again, remember, all we're trying to do is just start with this basic, like, according to the fiction F.
It's gonna run into the Star Wars thing.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So again, this kind of move gets us in completeness. We get, in every world, Holmes is a detective. Cool. In every world in the set, Holmes is not a dentist. Cool. So things can be true in the fiction, things can be false in the fiction. Some things will be neither true nor false in the fiction. Again, just kind of mapping onto the broad idea. Okay? So even though worlds, to go back, have to be complete, sets of worlds don't have to be. Because we can understand these according to operators as basically restricted necessities. Okay. So now the trick becomes the second question. Right? How does a text or a fiction indicate the appropriate worlds? And here's a really naive kind of idea. Right? We take this set of worlds where the events of the plot occur, right? Where the story events take place. There's two worries here. One of them is very deep down the philosophy of language rabbit hole. One of them is a little bit more surface. The first surface one is a kind of circularity. Sometimes, in order to figure out what the plot events are, we have to know what's true in the story, and then we're stuck. Right? This is an epistemic problem. We wouldn't know what the plot is, what's true in the story, because we can't kind of bootstrap ourselves to get going. The deeper worry, which is slightly silly, but an actual substantive worry, is that the actual world might inadvertently be included in the set. It's harder with the Holmes stories, but you can think about other fictions where we could map this sort of thing onto. But just suppose, for the sake of weirdness, right, there really was, in Victorian times, this kind of dude named Holmes who lived in 221B Baker Street, and he did these things. Well, Holmes, as used in the story, shouldn't pick out the actual Holmes. Again, it's slightly silly, but you can hopefully see the structure of the problem.
If you think you're writing fiction and then accidentally describe the real world thing.
That's the kind of issue, right? The name that you've used in the fiction, it's a homonym for the real name of the person, but it's not the name for the person, right? It fails to satisfy all the stuff we talked about in the first two lectures with kind of being a proper denotation for that individual.
Can't you say it's indiscernible? So not identical, but indiscernible.
Yeah,
exactly the same.
That'd be totally fine. But again, the broad thought is we've got to find a way to kind of isolate this. We don't want, even if the actual world turns out to be a plot world, we don't want it to be in the set. So, quick fix. Instead of worlds where the events occur, it's world where the fiction is told as known fact. So we take the idea that a fiction is a story told by a storyteller on a particular occasion. In the actual world, a fiction is a story told with the idea of it being a fiction. In the fictional worlds, the story is told as fact. It's giving you a kind of, this is what happened here thing. So the storytelling act occurs like it does in the actual world, but instead of a storytelling, it is an act of truth-telling. So this gives us Lewis's first analysis. Analysis 0. A sentence of the form in fiction FP is going to be true, no, actually true, if and only if P is true at every world where F is told as known fact rather than fiction. So this blocks the actual world from being in the set, but it leaves all of the other things that we might have. So you can have an ultra-realistic fiction with just one thing be different, or hell, even potentially everything just actually be factual, but as long as it's told as a fiction here and not as known fact, the world is excluded from the set.
So if we take maybe movies like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman, they are stories based on facts. Maybe they try to resemble them one by one, but they are narrated, so they are not.
Yes. So it's still going to keep it as a kind of fact-based fiction, but it remains a fiction. Even if they were perfectly veridical, at least in theory, perfectly veridical. So, again, all of this is designed to kind of give us a way to make sense of when these kinds of claims, when these kinds of claims are true. So this is an attempt at giving us semantics for the truth and fiction claims. Okay, analysis 0 is unfortunately bad. To see why it's bad, we've got to make another distinction. And this is a deep, dark one when it comes to fictional truth. It's one that gets repeated all over the shop. It's one that gets questioned, but it lies at the heart of many discussions. There's a difference between two types of fictional truths or fictional content. We have what we can call primary content or explicit content, and this is the stuff we're explicitly or directly told. So we're told in the Holmes stories that Holmes lives in 221B Baker Street. We're told explicitly that he's a detective, that he lives with Watson, etc., etc., etc. The secondary content is basically everything else that's included in the story. And when I say included in the story, I don't mean told in the story, I mean the other fictional truths. So secondary content broadly divides into two types. We have implied content and imported content. Implied content is the stuff that's true in the fiction that's inferred or derived from the other stuff. So for example, if we're told that Holmes is human, we can then infer that he has lungs, even though we're never told. We know that he breathes, we know that he smokes, we know that he's human, we can pretty much guarantee that he has lungs. But we're never told, so we have to make that inferential jump.
Don't you all, oh yeah, okay, I think maybe I make a mistake in thinking, but don't you always need like pre-knowledge when like reading the primary content first, like some implicature or whatever?
Nice. So there is always a worry about how exactly to map the stuff on the text to the content, and that's something we're going to have to worry about. But remember, we're always interested in the content. So whatever the story from explicit text to direct propositions, insert story there, that's the kind of move we've got to make there. All the rest of it, though, is more than that. There is no proposition or sentence or anything that tells us this. We've got to figure it out. Yeah.
So I haven't read the novels myself, but if it isn't implied in any sense that well, maybe it isn't said that he's human.
Mhm.
So he's described with certain rags and stuff, and we can infer from that he could be human. Is that then also implied content?
Good. Yeah, it would be, right? If we're not explicitly told that he is, but we've got a bunch of evidence that suggests he is, and then we think, okay, look, because it's a broadly realistic story, he's going to be a human being. He's not a Martian. Right?
Grade A.
Then that's the sort of thing we would be inferring. Right?
Yeah.
It's not explicitly told, so cool.
I don't see the difference between those two. I mean,
These ones?
Yeah.
Good.
The first one is also important, right? It could be a story in which humans have no lungs, but that's not
Nice.
not the case.
So strictly speaking, the fact that Holmes has lungs is going to be derived from Holmes is human and the imported general claim that all humans have lungs.
Mhm.
So that's why this is derived, whereas that kind of all humans have lungs will be something we bring in with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there is a difference. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but again, there's a difference there. And the second one, the second thing we've already briefly gestured at, this idea of imported content. This is stuff we're bringing from the outside. Bringing from the outside could be taking actual truths. London's west of Antwerp, Glasgow's north of London, whatever you want, right? All humans have lungs. It might also be stuff that we're bringing in because of genre. So, the Butler's being shifty. We know that this kind of genre, the Butler's always the one that did it. The Butler, what done it? Say. Even if we're never told and we have to infer, you see the kind of things. The guy in the white hat's the goodie, the guy in the black hat's the baddie. Blah, 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 blah. Well, what's important is we've got this. The explicit content, the implied content, and this imported content. Often, this and this is going to give us the implied. Sometimes you can just get it directly from the primary. Sometimes it's going to come from the imported. Sometimes you're going to have to do some like primary and implied and then use them to keep going. Right. Okay. Analysis 0 fails because it fails to deliver the intuitively correct secondary content. Here's something that should be true in the Holmes stories. Holmes and Watson live closer to Paddington Station than they do to the Waterloo Station. So this is from 221B Baker Street. It's about a mile to Paddington. It's 2.9 miles to Waterloo. Holmes is a realistic fiction. It depicts London. We don't think in a way that's radically different than it actually is. So this should be true in the story. But of course, if we go back to analysis 0, that doesn't hold. Because there will be plenty of worlds where it's told as known fact, but the actual geography of London is slightly different. Because it doesn't mention, the stories don't mention anything about proximity to these two stations. It talks about being in London, but the actual fact of the geography of London versus the possible geography of London means that it's not going to be in every world such that they live closer to Paddington than Waterloo.
To be clear, in the stories, this is not mentioned.
It's not
They
mentioned.
close. Okay.
This kind of proximity claim is not mentioned.
This. You could say this is imported content, but you can't.
It's imported and then inferred, right? Imported that the stations are located where they actually are, and then given where we're told they live, we can do this kind of inference, right? So this is something that's pretty plausible for the stories, not explicitly said, but it seems pretty plausible because they're realistic stories happening in London.
Mm-hmm.
So cool, but this isn't going to be delivered by analysis 0.
But the same goes for the Antwerp example. Right?
Same goes for the
story,
right? It's not going to be delivered because we're importing it, and analysis 0 doesn't guarantee that the imports will hold. So analysis 0 is too flat. It's going to give us pretty thin fictions. Lewis suggests a way to solve this issue. And what we're going to do is appeal to reality. So I'll read the Lewis quote. It's lengthy, but it's useful. We depart from actuality as far as we must to reach a possible world where the counterfactual supposition comes true. But we do not make gratuitous changes. We hold fixed the features of actuality that don't have to be changed as part of the least disruptive way of making the supposition true. We can safely reason from the part of our factual background that is thus held fixed. So what's the basic idea? We take everything that is actually the case, we use that, and hold as much of that as fixed as we can that doesn't conflict with what we're explicitly told, and that's going to be the thing that then helps us. We look for, right, those facts that would obtain if every primary truth were the case, keeping all of the reality stuff held. Yeah.
So what you can say is that every fictional story is in fact our world, unless told otherwise.
Yeah, it's as close to our world as you can possibly get it. So we hold as much of the actual world as we can fixed, and then we go and look, okay, find all of the worlds where we've changed it to suit the explicit facts. That's going to give us the set. Right? And then what's going to be true in the fiction is everything in all of those worlds taken together.
And this would mean we no longer have sets of worlds, right? That we just have one possible.
No, we still have sets. Because what we're going to think about is all of the worlds where we change everything, make fitting explicitly.
But that's just one world, right? Our world minus those things that are changed.
There's still going to be a bunch of things that will vary, right? Because the world doesn't tell us,
for example.
Yeah, right? The world doesn't tell us about the grandmother, so that's still going to vary. All of the stuff that kind of hinges on the fiction, that's still going to be contingent as long as it's not fixed, right? So you get, right, this idea of holding fixed all the primary truths, see what counterfactually follows. Again, this is something I don't think we've talked about, but the broad idea of a counterfactual, you hold everything fixed except what you want to tweak. You tweak it and then see what would happen. So we get this. This looks hideous, but we'll try and talk through it, right? Analysis 1. A sentence of the form in the fiction P is non-vacuously true if and only if some world where F is told as a known fact and P is true differs less from our actual world on balance than does any world where F is told as known fact and P is not true. So here's what it's saying, right? Hold everything that we actually take to be true. Go to the nearest worlds where the story is told as known fact. This will give us a range of worlds, right? Kind of a circle around us, if you like. And in those worlds, everything that we hold to be true, that's actually true, slightly tweaked to accommodate the explicit stuff. Right? Cool. Those worlds will give us the ones we're paying attention to. That's the kind of world W. Right? Our first one, told as known fact in P. And then there'll be other worlds that are slightly further away where not P. And why is that? Because in those worlds that are slightly further away, we have to change one similarity away from the actual truth. It's one step further than what we had. You can really think about it kind of parenthetically as like degrees of difference. So we go out as far as we need to. Say you have to change 10 actual facts to get you to the worlds where it's comporting with what's explicitly told. Right? Stuff will be true in the fiction if it holds in those 10 steps away. And the stuff that doesn't hold is because it's 11 steps or 13 steps or 14 steps. They're further away. They require more change.
So then what are the precise steps?
Good. So this will be kind of dependent on whatever the fiction you're playing with is, right? All you've got to do is make sure that you hold whatever's actually true, modifying it to fit what you're explicitly told. So it could be really easy. It could be quite significant. This is why he has that and that might be quite far if the supposition's a fantastical one. But importantly, whatever you change, and is true in those worlds, is going to be closer than whatever's one step further, whatever that might be. Again, this is also just a kind of rough-handed way to get grip. Yeah. Okay, so this is analysis one. Analysis one always brings us back to the actual world. Actual world facts are the kind of settlers of proximity. So the idea is fictional truth depends on contingent facts. Right? Had the London stations been located differently, then there'd be different fictional truths in the home stories, right? The kind of proximity claim would be false. Here's the big problem with analysis one. Certain actual truths fuck up what's fictionally true. Here's the case. The Adventure of the Speckled Band is another Holmes story where Holmes solves the murder by realizing that there's a snake that comes down and climbs up a bell pull. Right? So basically just like a rope. And the snake described is a Russell's viper. It's mentioned as being one in the story. Very poisonous, right? Was known.
Venomous.
Yeah, true. Sorry, yes. Poisonous. It might be poisonous too. If you eat it, it's bad for you. Problem. There is no way the Russell's viper was actually the murder weapon. Because Russell's viper is not a constrictor, so it could not have climbed up and down the bell pull. So if we use analysis one, Holmes got the murder wrong. The case should still be open. And admittedly, as Lewis talks about, right, Holmes never being wrong isn't strictly part of the stories, but Jesus Christ, does it feel like part of the stories. The fact that Holmes was wrong about this case does not seem like it should be something that's true in the story. But according to analysis one, it is. Why? Because it's actually true that the Russell's viper could not have done that. And it's never explicitly told this is what the Russell's viper did. It's Holmes saying, this is my hypothesis, it's the only one left. So Holmes's hypothesis is just wrong if we follow analysis one. So analysis one sometimes delivers counterintuitive results. Yeah. Lewis offers another option if you don't like this result. The other option is instead of appealing to actual truths, we appeal to what we'll call collective belief worlds. So we don't hold fixed everything that is actually true. We hold fixed everything that the broad society the author was in took to be true, what they thought was the case. But importantly, it can't just be what the author thought, because there might be some really weird things here, as with Doyle. But it's the overt beliefs. And again, this is just a kind of way to try and fix this. So we take the overt beliefs, we go to the nearest world where they're all true, and then we run the counterfactual move from that world. So it isn't focused on actual truths, it's focused now on what they believe as a group.
But there are some things that they don't have any beliefs about that are still...
So we're going to have to do kind of sphere based on the sphere. Interesting, that's actually not a technical problem at all for this kind of account. You just end up with a very weird shape, as it were. But you still end up with the same kind of thing. So the problem with analysis 2 is that it can kind of deliver even worse results. So here's a really silly one, right? Everybody knows Dr. Seuss. People know Dr. Seuss, right? Green eggs and ham, one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, that kind of stuff. Kids' books from the US. Thing to note, he was a horrific racist towards Asian people. And he was in a community where that was perfectly acceptable and overtly believed. So that means that a bunch of anti-Asian racism will be true in stories like Green Eggs and Ham, which is weird because Green Eggs and Ham is not at all about that kind of stuff, right? It's about a man with a hat trying to feed another man green eggs and ham. If you don't like this, just take the hungry, hungry caterpillar, right, or the very hungry caterpillar, substitute in some strange belief that, Olson has, right, in his community, and that's going to be true according to this story. Again, the broad thought here is worrisome. So the kind of move here is, and we'll take a break after this, right? The kind of general issue we're having isn't really with the mechanism. This idea of appealing to sets of worlds and then filling in some of the gaps, either via this kind of reality principle or via appeal to the overt belief worlds, is potentially viable. It's just something where we've got to kind of iron out the details to make sure that we get the right kind of group, the right kind of stuff we're holding fixed to generate the right implicit and imported truths. Okay. So this gives us roughly the kind of world's account. Now, note, a lot of this is driven by, again, this initial concern about incompleteness. So we have these sets. But kind of similar stuff is going to work if we try and pick out individual worlds. We're going to have similar worries about, do we take them to be closer to the actual world? Do we take them to be closer to the overt beliefs of the author's community? However we want to do it. There's a big bad worry, though. Yeah?
And how far can we say that our own world is not complete?
Good. So there's an implicit thought here, right, that classical logic is true. And one reason to think that is, well, everything is supposed to follow from a contradiction. Doesn't feel like absolutely everything is true. So we can quickly convert incompleteness into a contradiction, doing some jiggery-pokery with where we put negations and which operator we have. So we've got a reason to think that it's not incomplete. Of course, we could push back on that and just deny explosion, deny classical logic, and then we're in a big fight. Right? But that's the rough and ready reason. Right? Yeah. The other fun thing we might think is that the actual world is a set of possible worlds already, right? And what we're doing is kind of sorting out which particular instance of that set we're going to be in. Topic for another day. Okay. So we've gotten mostly through the Lewis stuff. Here's my proposal. We're at 49 and 30 seconds. We take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 2 and wrap up for the rest. Okay.